What is consciousness? How does it use perception to interact with reality? What is time and how do we interact with it? Is this all real or is it a simulation? Join us as we answer these questions on our final experiment of Phase 1.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Adonis. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing wonderful.
Awesome. So, this is it. It is all culminated to this episode, this experiment.
This experiment of Phase 1. Super exciting.
Phase 1. So just to kind of debrief everybody. So instead of doing seasons, we are doing what we call phases. It fits the whole experiment paradigm that we're going with. So this is the concluding episode or concluding experiment of Phase 1.
Yes, sir.
And obviously we will start Phase 2 following this experiment.
Yep.
Yeah, so today's episode, Nick.
Yep.
What do you think?
It's going to be interesting and exciting and wavy for sure.
Wavy. You're just going to get a little wavy in her. All right. So today's experiment will be on reality. What is reality? Obviously, there are a lot of little subfields and subcategories of what reality is. And we are going to go into those. So just to give you guys a preview, we are looking to discuss fields such as perception and consciousness, what time is, and ultimately the whole idea behind living in a simulation or lack thereof living in a simulation. So, should we just get right into this?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So, to begin, we will start with perception and consciousness. Obviously, consciousness is super intertwined and super correlated with perception. What we perceive becomes our reality.
Yep.
And us being conscious of it materializes this sense of reality, this experience around us. So, what's your take on perception? We'll open with that. What are some footnotes you want to put into perception?
Well, I guess first I would say perception, I feel like has to be or is very much based on perspective. They seem to have like the same root. So I would say that, when we talk about perception, you have to really take into consideration the individual perspective of whatever being is perceiving something. And so I think that's really important when you start talking about consciousness and reality, because everything can change in an instant when you change the perspective of whatever is being perceived.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I think perception in general has like two sides. Like every perceptual experiences has two sides. It has both objective and subjective, right? Like some people see things differently. For example, people that are colorblind, they won't see red. Yeah. But, a person with the ability to see, different color across the different color spectrums, they see red. Mm. But objectively, we would like to believe that when something is red, it is red, right? Because that is the empirical information that we have, like this is what red is. Right. But subjectively, of course, that could also differ using the colorblind example. And then objectively, we discussed that already. So yeah, you were pretty spot on about what, how perception is all about perspective. Cause it does have like the same beginning or the same root. So,
have you ever, you remember that internet trend going around with like the dress,
the blue and black dress?
Yeah.
What did you say it was?
Actually, I think I saw blue. I think I saw blue as well.
Yeah. Well, it was blue, black, or what was it, like white and gold?
Yeah. Gold and white. Yeah. I saw blue. I saw blue and black.
It was black and it was blue and black. I don't know what the fuck anyone else is saying.
But I mean, that's totally right there. You can see like how people's realities are different
Right.
based on their own perception, which is kind of in one person's reality that dress is gold and white, and in ours it's blue and black. So
yeah, agreed.
There's an example there.
Yeah, there you go. That is an example of subjective perception.
Mm-hmm.
So with perception, obviously, you know, you can correlate consciousness with it, right? Would you say that is something that you could do?
I would almost go even further and say you would have to have consciousness to be able to engage in perception, right?
Big facts, yeah.
Like that's kind of the foundation of perceiving something, is being able to take in that information and then process it consciously.
Yeah. And it's also interesting because there are biologists and physicists and a whole bunch of people that believe that consciousness comes from a biological level, right? Just as perception does. Yeah. Ultimately, everything comes from the brain, how the brain's activity is being processed with the different parts of the brain, and how obviously the information, the stimuli that is being input into the brain, how that information is being processed and what the output becomes. Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to start with visual perception, because I think visual perception is obviously the most interesting form of perception.
Yeah.
I mean, auditory is cool, but let's be real, right? Like visual, I would say is the best, in my opinion.
No, yeah, definitely.
So to look at it from a biological perspective, there's obviously a lot of things that are going on, right? To begin, let's start from the very, very, very beginning. And to preface, right, I'm going to kind of, how do I put it? I'm going to try to explain it like in a way that, you know, like the general audience can understand. I'm not going to use like biological like nomenclatures and like so people don't get lost, right? So I'll try to like explain it as easy as I can, and if you get lost too, just let me know and I'll try to explain it as best I can to you, and hopefully it'll help out the listeners, because really you're the only person that can slow me down or stop me whenever you feel confused.
Got you. All
right, cool. So when there's things called stimuli, right? Things that stimulate our senses. There is let's say there's a stimulus coming into your eye. You see something, there's information that is being input into your eye. Obviously, the first interaction that it makes with your eye is lens. And then from the lens, it goes to the retina. And then from that, the information I'm talking about. So lens, retina, and then from the retina, it goes through a layer of different cells. I'm not going to get into the specific names of those cells, but it goes through a layer of cells, which then goes to your optic nerve. Everybody knows that term. And then from the optic nerve, it goes to something called the LGN. That is the lateral geniculate nucleus. And from there, it gets distributed to the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe is located in the back of the brain. So the very back of your brain, that's where, oddly enough, where the information visually goes to get processed.
I always thought that was kind of inefficient to have processing center like as far away as possible from your eyes.
It's literally on the opposite side. And speaking of opposite, the information from your left eye gets processed by the right side of the occipital lobe, and the information from the right side gets processed by the left side.
Okay, I also heard that like the images, like if you were to take them as they were before being processed, they'd be upside down, and our brain like flips it. Is that true?
Yeah. So, kind of. So, and what happens is actually, so the things, man, this is like, it's hard to explain it without like being able to like visually do it.
Yeah.
But basically things that you see on the right side of your eye. So okay. Imagine a wall. Okay. Imagine a wall.
I'm imagining
the right side of the wall is red and the left side of the wall is blue.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So whatever is on the right side, so the red side of the wall.
Yeah.
From your left eye, the left side of your left eye will process the right side of that wall.
Whoa. Okay.
I think I could. This is information I should have brushed up on, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Okay.
But take this with a grain of salt. So everybody else, you should do your due diligence and research to call me out if I'm wrong. Side note, we do have an Instagram. It's called Experiment Podcast. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, go ahead and directly go there and DM us, and we'll respond.
Yes,
Call me out if I'm wrong. Call Nick out if he's wrong.
I never am.
He's never wrong, but in the event that he is wrong, which is extremely rare.
Extremely rare.
Extremely rare. Almost impossible.
Yeah.
Go ahead and call him out. But yeah, take full advantage of that.
Yeah.
So the way the eye processes information is bizarre as fuck. Like,
right.
And this is exactly why I find visual perception so interesting. I mean, you know, auditory perception has its own intricacies and things that are really interesting and mysterious. So does like feeling and things like that. But visual perception, I think it's insane.
Yeah. And I think it's like cool too. I mean, this is like kind of a side note, but like the optical illusions. So you like that kind of can play into this whole perception and reality, in that like you can see how the mind can be easily fooled, and the reality can definitely shift under the right circumstances, right? So
yeah. So I believe what that actually falls under, the what you like optical illusions and things like that. I believe that falls under something called the Gestalt principles of cognitive psychology.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. I believe there's about 7 of them.
Okay.
Again, if I'm wrong, hit me. But yeah, they're and like, for example, like, you know, when there's like let's say there's a triangle, right? But that triangle isn't filled out entirely. Like there's something blocking it from actually being fully completed. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, imagine there's a triangle and then there's like a line that's going through that triangle, but your brain automatically, because it has information. This is what's called top down. This is when it goes from the top, meaning your brain, down to your visuals.
Okay.
So your top down information processing system understands that this more than likely is a triangle, so it will actually fill in those spaces. It'll actually fill in those spaces that are missing from that line to connect and create a completed triangle.
Right.
So like that, isn't that interesting? Like, yeah. Am I the only one that's interested in that?
No, I mean, I think it's super interesting. I feel like that has to do something with just like the way we evolved and being able to do that in terms of like creating things, like our ability to kind of put pieces together and make tools and things like that. Like, I feel like it kind of stems from that, and being able to create. I think that's kind of how that part of perception is important.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's where were we? Okay, we're getting a little bit off track. Got it.
We did this last episode. Consciousness. We did on
perception.
We did visuals.
We did visuals. Yeah. So okay, like, how does this relate to consciousness, and how does this relate to reality? How would you connect perception with consciousness? Based off of what we've talked about?
I mean, I would say that like that perception, the act of perception, is integral for our consciousness to interact with our surroundings. Like, that's kind of the gateway between our own consciousness and the reality around us, and that's what perception is. Okay,
yeah, I like that. And then so in terms of consciousness, how would you? Okay, so you would say consciousness comes before perception, or without consciousness there would be no perception?
Yes.
I think that's like, I feel like that's kind of like obvious.
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree with you. And it's interesting because there's a whole bunch of mechanisms at play within the brain, right, to create perception, to create consciousness. Mm-hmm. But it's like, okay, so what is consciousness? The big question. How do we think? I mean, this is going back to the episode about thought, but how do we perceive? How do we like know? You know?
Yeah.
And so this was actually a question or something that a German mathematician conceptualized. He asked this question. His name is Gottfried Leibniz. Leibniz, I think. That's how it's pronounced. But he's a German mathematician, and he took on, you know, this question of what perception is. And this was in 1714. So this was like,
bro,
damn near 400 years ago. Not really.
There was some stupid smart people. You know,
dude,
what I mean? Like,
yeah,
just the stuff that like these people were coming up with back when they didn't have any access to like any of the tools we have today. It just blows my mind.
You know what I think it is? I think it's because there was less distraction back then.
Yes.
This isn't to take away from the genius that they were, but I mean, I feel like with how much distractions we have now with like our cell phones and like, you know, like social media and like double tapping and things like that. There's just so much. I honestly feel that there is a correlation between attention span and what we see on the internet.
Oh, because absolutely.
You know, like you'll see articles, right? You'll see articles and they'll be like a summary. And then it's like fucking flashing pictures and shit like that. Like, oh, go to the next article, see what this person's doing, see what that person's doing. And it's just like all condensed information. And your attention span can't go past like 2 minutes of reading without it being attracted to something else.
Oh, yeah. No, it's kind of insane. I mean, I've seen it in like younger people too, like just the inability to engage in anything that like takes more than 5 minutes, because like that's just the generation we live in, is like you have to be constantly absorbed with like feeding yourself new information, and it's insane.
Absolutely.
And so I think that the lack of the distraction for sure, I think, was helpful in kind of providing an environment to like really excel in whatever field those people were in. But yeah, I think even like the most genius people today are probably will be limited by the distractions.
Yeah, I mean, that's why like some artists, like, you know, like musicians, they'll literally leave their city and they'll go to like, some people go to like Hawaii. Like I know Travis Scott, I think he goes to Hawaii. He has a studio over there where it's like away from like, you know, like LA and like Texas and like, you know, those like big like culture hubs, and he just goes to Hawaii and they like do recordings there, like beachside. Like, yeah, I guess the beach could be viewed as a distraction, but it's like nature. It's nature reaction. Yeah. It's natural reaction. It's not like, what's that one word that you used? Anthropogenic.
Yeah.
Could that be applied here? Like anthropogenic distractions?
Definitely. Yeah.
Created by
man. Yeah.
There you go. Anyways, okay, let's go back to Leibniz.
Yeah.
So his take on perception was interesting, and this is a quote that he's using, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. So I'm going to start the quote. It goes, "We must confess that perception and what depends upon it is inexplicable in terms of mechanical reasons, that is, through shapes, size, and motions. If we imagine a machine whose structure makes it think, sense, and have perceptions, we could conceive it enlarged, keeping the same proportions so that we could enter into it," right? So it's saying like, let's assume a machine, and we can make it big enough and keep everything proportionally similar, and then we can go walk into it, like you and I can walk into it. And he uses a mill, like a mill as a analogy. I think that's the right use of whatever. Anyways, he uses a mill, and then he says, assuming that when inspecting the interior, we will find only parts that push one another. So cogs in a machine, for example.
Okay.
And we will never find anything to explain a perception. And so one should seek perception in a simple substance and not in the composite or in the machine. So just before we kind of break this down, how do you interpret this quote? I know it's kind of long.
Yeah.
I know it's a mouthful. But essentially, he's talking about, like, let's assume there's a machine and he uses a mill, right? Let's assume a mill, and we can make it huge, and all the pieces that make it work remain the same in terms, like proportionally. And you go inside of it and you see all these like different like cogs, like different things working to make one another work. But you can't pinpoint a location where perception is actually originating.
You can't see the final product. Is that like what I'm understanding? So you see all the like into like the little pieces, and then you can't see like what it's making. Is that what the analogy is trying to say?
That could definitely be one way to interpret it. I didn't think of that. I think how I perceived, I like your way kind of better than the way I was perceiving it, to be honest. How I interpreted it was that, like, you can see, like, okay, this thing is cutting wood, and then this wood will go over there, and then that thing will do this to the wood, and then you see what I'm saying?
Right.
But you can't find where, like, if you were to look at it, you can't find, I guess what you're saying is right. You can't find like the final product until that product is finished.
Right.
So how we could view this actually is that perception is a culmination of all of these little pieces. It is the final product, as you said, of all these final pieces.
Yeah. And I think you can, translating to human perception, you have all these different senses kind of coming together, which I guess could be related to like the cogs in the machine. And then at the end of the day, we have this, or not end of the day, but with all of the different senses that we have and all the inputs that we're receiving from the world around us, you kind of create this perception, which can't really be pinpointed. You can't say this is perception. It kind of just is what it is. And it's resulting from all these different senses and how your brain or your consciousness processes the information that it's receiving. So it's kind of like it's like there, but it isn't. You know what I mean? It's hard to define. And I think maybe that's how I'm interpreting this quote.
Okay.
You could almost get lost inside of what it is,
what it could be, or whatever, right? So how we could view this from a perspective that I feel like we would all understand. We have, Jenga. You know what Jenga is, right? Everybody knows what Jenga is. Yeah. So let's say you have a Jenga, whatever tower. All these little pieces make up this tower, this game. And so that tower could very well be in relation, or if you were to relate it, that could be perception. That could be what perceiving is. Like that tower could be perception itself. And these little tiny pieces are the pieces that make it become perception.
Yeah.
The little pieces that work with one another, as you said, to kind of create. They're like, it's the constituents. Yeah. I guess that's a good, right?
Yeah,
it's the constituents of what perception is. So, go ahead.
Oh, and just to build onto that analogy, you can probably remove some pieces of whatever makes up perception, right? You can take out a block here, you can take out a block here and there, and the tower will still be there. Perception as a whole will still be there, but you take something out that's key or foundational to what perception is, and then it'll fall down or it'll be gone.
You slip into psychosis.
Yeah. You're just there.
Exactly. And so interestingly enough, there were a series of scientists and researchers that kind of like added on to what Leibniz was saying. There was an English biologist in 1869. His name was Thomas Huxley, I believe that's how it's pronounced. It's Huxley. That's Huxley, right?
Could be Huxley.
Yeah, Huxley. It could be Huxley. Yeah, it's probably Huxley. What he did, he compared the human brain to primate brains, right? And then he kind of like proved Darwin's theory, or he like added evidence to Darwin's theory,
right?
How we came from primates, because primates like we perceive at a higher level than how monkeys perceive, I guess. or our consciousness is at a higher state than what monkeys is, something like that. But he couldn't find the physical location of consciousness. So how is it that consciousness seems to evolve, but you still can't find an point of origin of consciousness?
Yeah. No, that's
You know what I mean?
That's super trippy. Well, and if you think about it too, like, I mean, this could be applied to any discussion of the brain, but like when you, if it's like consciousness trying to find itself, you know what I mean? It's like it's like a dog chasing its own tail kind of thing.
Yeah, like the brain studying itself.
Yeah,
trying to figure out how it works.
Like itself. It almost
that's really weird.
Yeah, but I mean the brain, like you could, it makes sense for it to like look at it, the structures and things like that. But consciousness, to discover itself, I feel like would be a whole nother. Like,
bro, I mean, that's the singularity,
we know it's there,
right there,
but we don't. Yeah, but we don't know. Like, we can't like put it together and define it and say this is what it looks like and this is how it works, and it's just kind of there.
Yeah, damn.
And I think, I mean, different philosophers have different viewpoints. Some say that it is the, result of the different chemical reactions in the brain. Some people say that it's separate. Logically, probably makes sense that it is from the biological processes in our brain, but who's to say that it isn't,
I agree. Yeah. And just to further kind of push that whole like physical location of a brain or of consciousness, sorry, there was another physicist. This is the last person I'm going to bring up. It's an Irish physicist. His name was John Tyndall. And he quoted and said, "The passage from the physics of the brain to the corresponding facts of consciousness is unthinkable." Meaning the way that our brain interacts with itself, where at a smaller level, the neurons interact with themselves, or even smaller than that, the neurochemicals that that interact with with one another. But we still can't find, like, no matter how small we get, no matter how small we reduce the size, we still can't find a physical location of consciousness.
Right. It's just,
no matter what.
It's just, yeah, it's crazy. Because, I mean, you hear like, it's like known if you study the brain at all that like there's emotions. You can like point to certain regions in the brain for specific emotions, right? And so it's like we can kind of begin to understand how our brain physically is involved in the way we perceive things, right? But at the same time, yeah, as a whole, like we can't understand that kind of link, I guess, between like the biological and consciousness.
Yeah. And so biology. So we can say that we can assume that consciousness has some sort of biological basis. Would you agree with that?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So in 2005, are you familiar with the journal Science?
Yes.
Yeah. So in 2005, the journal Science actually ranked 125 of the top open questions within science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one that ranked second was, what is the biological basis of consciousness? So with this question, you could say that it is assumed that consciousness does have some sort of biological origin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this, sorry, I said I'm not going to mention any more people, but there was this person called Francis Crick, and his hypothesis was that you and everything about you, what you feel, what you think, how you react, it all comes from some sort of arrangement of neurons and some sort of interaction with those neurons. Would you say that could ultimately be what consciousness is?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to consider that as a possibility. But at the same time, like to the previous point that you made about like no matter how infinitely small we go, we can't like pinpoint like what causes our perceived consciousness. I think you could just like jump and say, well, it's because it's not a part of the brain. You know what I mean? It's not that like, so I don't know.
Yeah. And what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought. Yeah, so okay. So there's this whole theory called the reductionist theory, right? Where if you reduce everything down, it all comes down to an arrangement of particles, right? Because like everything is essentially particles in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps consciousness is actually an arrangement of those particles. So let's say, the particles are in a star shape, right?
Mm-hmm.
That shape, that arrangement of those particles has sprung consciousness. And had that shape been any different, if one particle was slightly misplaced, the entire creation, the entire building block of what consciousness is could have completely collapsed and been something completely different.
Right.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's very interesting to consider. And then on top of that, you could then say if there are minute changes made to whatever the arrangement is, then that form of consciousness could exist and be different and therefore be kind of anywhere or all around us. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like there could be in some alternate, I don't want to say alternate, like even just within our own reality that we're in now, maybe there are other conscious beings or like there is a form of consciousness that isn't like ours. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Something to consider.
Yeah. Have you heard of the hard problem of consciousness? Have you heard of that phrase?
No.
So it's essentially, that's exactly what it is. It's a hard problem within consciousness. It's trying to build a bridge between, what a conscious mind is and what, with natural sciences like physics, chemistry, biology. So obviously, going back to subjective experiences, right? How perception could be subjective. There are things called qualias. Are you familiar with qualias?
No.
So qualias are essentially when you give something a quality.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So yeah, so it's like the individual instances of a subjective and conscious experience. So again, going back to the blue and black dress, that is a qualia. We experience that dress or shirt or whatever it was as black and blue, whereas some people's experience was gold and white. Right. That is what a qualia is. And so going back to the hard problem of consciousness, it's how can we quantify or how can we categorize these subjective experiences within the realm of natural sciences? Because ultimately, right, what you experience, you can talk to me about what you experience, right? Like you could tell me how you feel. But the reality is I will never fully understand. I will never fully be able to replicate that same experience as you.
Right. Which is, yeah, it's so interesting. Right. And that goes for every single person on this earth, which is like
every single person on this
7 billion at least consciousness are like experiencing different things simultaneously while all being in the same planet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
and it's weird, right? Like, sure, the common denominator is, yeah, we're all conscious. But there are so many different experiences. Like, even though we all are conscious, we will never be able to be at the same level of consciousness or experience the same levels of life with our consciousness as the person next to us.
Experience the same reality.
Exactly. We will there it is.
There it is, right? There's the connection.
There it is. We will never be able to experience the same level as reality as the person right next to us.
Yep. Which is just crazy. So is reality a common denominator, or is it something that is in our own head? It's in our own mind?
Ooh. So reality. So I think there are things in this experience that some of us we can all agree on, right? Like when we see a ball, right? That's a ball. because, the shape of it is spherical. It bounces. You can roll it, you can kick it, you can throw it, whatever. That's a ball. Like that. I feel like there are some things that the qualia that are kind of objective.
But why is it a ball though?
That's how we've defined it.
Right.
So I see what you're saying.
Because so we define it as a ball. Let's say in, I don't know, 50,000 years, humans are still here and they define it as something completely different. You know what I mean? Even like across, like, I'm not saying like language, obviously. I'm saying like it's like defined as completely the way that it's its usage. Yeah, its usage. Everything about it is no longer how we perceive it to be as a ball. You know what I mean? Like, then.
So I guess what that does is it comes down to the semantics, like the meaning of what objectivity is, right?
Yeah.
So I guess,
I mean, like, who knows, like, what society would look like, in 50,000 years. But let's say, like, a ball is only specifically used for one thing, and it's called something else.
True. Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah. That could be right. Like they could. But So you're saying, like, if they have 50,000 years from now, how a ball is used in 50,000 years will be completely different than how a ball is used today.
Right.
Okay. Well, I guess if that is something, I guess if you zoom out, then you can take these two objectivities and call them subjective. Like relative to this time period, this was the objective belief, but 50,000 years later, this becomes the objective belief.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of like science too, right? Like there are some scientific facts that are objective. However, they could technically change, right?
Yeah.
Because science is ever evolving.
True.
And so objectivity could change. But I think what objectivity is, how I view it, is that it's a collection of common beliefs of something, and something that is testifiable. And if you can test it, and then if you can replicate those same results, then it kind of becomes objective.
Yeah, that's fair. And then therefore, you're saying that kind of represents the, like, common denominator of reality, that everyone experiences that the same.
Yeah, like we all, to a level, we all experience some sort of commonality.
Okay.
Obviously, there is like an innumerable number of variables that are involved in reality and in experience. But there are some that we can that are kind of grounded. You know what I mean? That you can say, okay, like we all experience this. But obviously there are things that you can't, and that's where, subjective reality comes into play. Like if you do acid or something, your reality is going to change.
Yeah.
What you see won't be the same as what somebody who's not on acid will see.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's how I see reality in the terms of like perception and consciousness, I think.
Okay.
What about you? Would you want to add anything to that?
I don't know, like, just kind of, I don't know. I've always seen it as kind of everyone's reality is different just because of the inability to be in someone else's shoes. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah. I get what you're saying. Like there has to be a certain level of commonality, but I don't know. For some reason, I feel like it's almost impossible.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think you can't categorize reality as neither objective or subjective.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think it's like a third party type of thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Because if you say reality is subjective or objective, then you are enforcing a belief like onto others that they may not perceive as the same as you do.
Yeah, you're assuming a perception.
Yeah, you're assuming a perception. And then if it's subjective, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like reality is more subjective than objective. I think it's in both. I think it falls under both. Like I said, I think there is some things that we can agree on, but I think there's a lot of things that we interpret and experience differently.
Yeah.
That's how I like time. Time is also relative.
Yep.
Time is also relative. What is your opinion on time, Nick?
I think that time is kind of outside of this, or I guess like is outside of our understanding. I would say like we use it, but or not. We can't use it. We can't manipulate it. We can't like touch it. We can't. There's no like sense of it really. It's just like it's something that kind of happens, and we just like are like there for the ride type of thing. You know what I mean? Like, and I was kind of reading up on it, and I guess there's like a debate between whether time is like the fourth dimension of space, or if it's like something completely separate. And it's like space itself is like moving like through time. It's not like time being a dimension of like space. And I kind of feel like I would lean more towards it being a like space is moving through time, just because I feel like if it was a fourth dimension, like it would be somewhat attainable for us to like manipulate it, which they say if you go fast enough, you can. So maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. So you could actually, it's interesting, by the way, that you said that we cannot manipulate time. I think that's a very interesting take that I feel like, sure, like people, like when you say it, right? When you say it, people are like, oh yeah, no shit, you can't manipulate time. But nobody like really like thinks about that. Like you cannot, time is like intangible. Is that, I feel like it's intangible. Like you can't, there's nothing you can do to influence time. It just is.
Yeah.
At least that's how a lot of people perceive it, right? Mm-hmm. It just is. And yeah, it could, like you said, it could be a completely different dimension of whatever, of existence. And I don't know. Time is very interesting to me. And so you would say it's relative, right? It's subjective.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. I always think about like us versus like maybe like a fly, and like how a fly perceives time probably like significantly differently than we do, right? Because it's like moving fast, it has a short life. Like I just feel like it would have to be perceiving time differently. Oh, this is a great example that has been kind of explored through film. That movie Interstellar. Have you ever seen it? It's like with Matthew McConaughey.
I'll tell you this. I've seen it once.
Okay. But
I have to watch it again because that ending did confuse me.
Yes.
So spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, skip like, I don't know, 2-3 minutes ahead because we're about to spoil the movie. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
So there's that scene where they're like, the guy's like above the planet and they like go on the planet. I don't remember for what reason. I think they were just maybe exploring to see if it was like a viable second Earth or whatever, and they're down there, and then he like ages like 40 years or something.
Oh, the water planet or whatever, where they thought it was mountains, but really it's waves.
Yeah.
Bro, that scene, I was like, get the hell out of there.
Bro, that like shook me up. They come back and the dude's like 60, like, and they're like, you waited, and like I'm like, yo, that's so crazy. Can you imagine like you wait like 40 years and it's been like 7 minutes for these people?
Dude, see, I don't remember him actually aging. I remember, so interestingly enough, there's in that same scene, if you listen, there's like a ticking sound.
Yeah.
There's and every time that ticks, I think it was like a number of years, like seven days or something pass.
Yeah.
And that tick was like literally every second. So like, you know, if you do the math, I'm not going to do it because I'm bad at arithmetic, but dude, isn't that like every tick was 7 days?
Yeah.
And it was happening like every second.
Yeah.
When I saw, because obviously when I first saw it, I didn't realize, I thought it was just like some sort of like, you know, ambient sound. And then I saw some post on probably Twitter or something. And like that tick was like a number of days. And I went back and watched it. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah. It's nuts.
Dude, it's insane.
Yeah. And so,
yeah, dude. So,
I mean, so I guess we can just really quick go over like the ending.
yeah, please, because I got kind of lost.
So I guess basically like what it was alluding to is that there are like conscious beings outside of like humans, and then those beings like had like basically planted like Matthew McConaughey's character in like that like dimension where he could like communicate with his like older daughter, and she could like figure out how to save humanity is basically like what happened.
So there was a completely different like species, or wasn't it like just like him, like the I think like the book Falling from the Shelf was Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, it was him, but basically like the reason he ended up there, supposedly, this is what I was reading on like some blog, was that some other like higher power planted him there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, so that's why the ending kind of confused me. I was like, wait, so like to be honest, so he went into the black hole, right?
Yeah.
Like he got swallowed by the black hole and then somehow ended up in this like
dimension,
middle plane of existence where there's like pockets of like time, right? Or in space.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Was that like the idea behind it? Like I feel like that, right? That was that. Yeah. Okay.
So it's just kind of like exploring, like, and then a lot of it, I think, was exploring the theory of relativity and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you could actually say that time is a completely independent variable of space, I guess, right?
Right.
Right. So yeah, and like time is obviously relative to space, to like what is happening, like distance and things like. Here's actually the thing. The only thing that's like, I guess, objective is distance. And somebody talks about that. Somebody poses this idea. It was a German mathematician. Dude, it's the Germans, man.
They know.
They're onto something, low key. This guy's name was Hermann Minkowski. And this diagram, or whatever it is called Minkowski space-time diagram. And you can imagine a cube, and you can imagine two dots on either side of the cube, whatever, right? Like let's say one of them is on the bottom right and the other one is on the top left. Just looking at it, it's called their lightning strike. So lightning struck at the bottom right and the top left. The only thing you can perceive, obviously, is the distance, right? Like how far they are from one another, right? You can't tell which one like struck first. So this is why time is kind of relative. It's subjective. Like, let's say you slice that cube, right? In whichever direction you want. How would you slice the cube?
Left to right.
Okay, left to right. You slice the cube left to right. Okay, now you have some sort of orientation. Obviously, you'll say, okay, well, if I'm reading it from left to right, then this first slice is where the lightning struck first. So therefore, this came before that. Now you have some sort of orientation of time.
Right.
But what if I say, no, I'm cutting it diagonally, and I'm going to read it from right to left. And now the one on the right side struck first relative to the left.
Yeah.
So which one struck first? We don't know.
We don't know. It's all frame of reference and perspective.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, okay, like if lightning does strike in our experience, we'll say, okay, this one struck first. Right. And then if we see another one, okay, that one struck first. Because that's what time ultimately is, right? It's the unit measurement between two separate events. But again, that to us, that is what it, to a fly. First of all, we don't even know if a fly can comprehend what a lightning strike is.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we know like how that fly perceives what time is? Time moves at a very different length or speed to a fly than it does to us.
Yeah.
So
there's I think it's been proven actually that clocks run, I think it's slower at super high speeds. Like the clocks that are like not digital, but like the quartz ones, And so apparently it's like kind of proves that time is relative, which I thought was super interesting.
So you're saying like if you were zooming down something, the clock works slower?
Right. I'm pretty sure it was slower. It doesn't really make sense for it to be going. I think it like kind of counteracts what's happening. So if you're like on a supersonic jet and you're like your clock would be going like it's like minute but like slightly slower.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense, because like you're traveling a distance faster than what you're
like Earth, I guess.
Yeah, Earth is like what you're used to.
You're right.
Damn. So, okay, then we can even take that whole lightning strike argument. Like if you look at it on a different planet or something where time works, and that planet is rotating around a black hole like it did in Interstellar, time works completely different there.
Yep.
So to, I guess time to us, for us, this is what time is. But in the grand scheme of things, time is obviously relative. And again, if you look at it from another reductionist point of view, I was actually watching another podcast. It was Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had a physicist on there, and he used this really, really cool example about what time is, or what they think it is. And if you take all these same particles, right? The orientation of these particles could also be what time is. And if you move these particles and orient them in some other pattern, time can be what we understand as time could be completely different. And as we know, everything in existence has a time, like a time limit, right? Like you and I are going to die, planets explode, they're born, it has some sort of uniformity to it, right?
Yeah.
And it's assumed that there will come a time where these particles fall apart, where the particles that hold like existence together, the universe together, will fall apart. And we have no idea what's going to happen beyond that point. But this is obviously, an innumerable number of years into the future, because the example they use is like Sears Tower, and like every floor you exponentially raise the time 10. So like first like 10, and then 100, then 1,000, 100,000, like that. And we're on like, I think there's like 34 floors. We're on floor 12 from Big Bang to whatever. Yeah. And we're on floor 12. And we have no idea what's going to happen on the 24th floor or whatever.
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
Remember earlier we were talking about like the common denominator of like reality and how.
Yeah. So
I'm kind of now thinking like maybe time is that, like it's something that nobody's reality is without. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Because ultimately without time, do you think existence would be without time? Like, do you think we can exist without time?
Not as we know it, I don't think.
Yeah. That's a deep thought.
Yeah.
Like, that's something when you're in the shower, when you're taking a shower, and that thought just like runs across your mind and you're like, holy shit. Dude, because how we I'm literally trying to comprehend it, but I can't. Like,
it's incomprehensible.
All we know is because all we know is time.
Yeah, it's all we.
And it's weird. Like if you look at it, like if we think of aliens, we automatically, for some reason in our head, we assume that anatomically they're similar to human beings.
Right.
Like they're gonna have eyes, ears, mouth, whatever.
And that they're gonna also experience time the same that we do and be able to interact with us. Like who's to say that they have like that they're. Let's assume that the fourth dimension theory is correct, like that they're living in a dimension where time is like a part of something they can manipulate and use, and like, so therefore they would not interact with us. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's what's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So we have like this conceit about us, like, right? Like we just like, if there are aliens and they're, so advanced, they're gonna be like us.
Yeah,
they're gonna have eyes. They're gonna have heads. Because that's all we know.
Yeah,
like that's the only data set that we can work off of.
Exactly.
And to us, all we have is time. Like time is the only type of, I don't know, or piece of existence that we have to work off. So we don't even know. There could be, like a whole argument about like this is a little tinfoil hat type of thing, but like interdimensional beings, they could be completely out of the whole paradigm of space and time. They could just be, literally.
Exactly. So what does that mean in terms of us being here? Is it real, or is it a simulation?
So the simulation, we've talked about it. We've teased it in like other episodes. We've never really dove into it. And obviously, if we were going to really, really, really dive into this, we would be here for another like 3-4 hours, and we're not going to do that. No. But we're going to actually kind of like talk about it now.
Yeah.
So the whole idea. First of all, when somebody tells you, what do you think about us living in a simulation, or your idea of simulation? What's your take on it?
My take is that it logically makes sense, but it's hard to like, I mean, as with any of these topics that we've kind of discussed in this podcast, it's hard to come to terms with the fact that your reality isn't like base reality. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we're very much geared to just like believe that everything is what it is and that's it. You know what I mean? So then to like pull the rug out from underneath that belief and say, actually, everything that you're doing is like kind of made up and you're just participating in it and it's not really real. Ooh, that would be kind of creepy. You know what I mean? So
it would be. I agree.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's like something to like definitely play around with. I've obviously like thought about it to myself, and it's definitely interesting. As I was kind of reading up on it, I'm sure you've heard of the allegory of the mind. I mean, the allegory of the cave.
I kind of remember it.
It's like,
but you're gonna have to tell me it. Yeah.
Okay, so a quick refresh is basically, there's these prisoners in a cave, and they are chained to the cave, and they look at the back wall, and that's the only thing that they ever see. Behind them is a fire, and then in front of the fire are people with little objects, like stone objects, and the fire kind of creates shadows on the wall, and that's what the prisoners see. So that's all they've ever known. That's all they ever see is these objects on the wall, and that's their understanding of their reality. Then one of the prisoners was released, and he turns around and sees the fire, and he's blinded by it, and he wants to go back to the shadows, basically. And so it's like it's a allegory that was like presented by Plato, and a lot of people interpret it as like a kind of how we learn in like education. Like it's like I kind of thought of it as like ignorance is bliss. Like they were content just looking at the cave. They didn't know they were prisoners. That's just what their existence was, right? So when he was presented that, it was scary. The fire was scary to him. It burned his eyes. He didn't want to look at it. Once he did, he realized what his reality was, and then he was enlightened, right?
Wow.
Same thing could go for, it can be applied though to like the simulation. So it's like the simulation is kind of more of a modern concept where the idea is that we're kind of in like a computer, some type of computer simulated environment, and we're just interacting with it as like Sims. But it could be applied to this allegory, which is like this ancient concept in that those prisoners in the cave could be in a simulation. The people controlling the little stones to create the shadows are like the orchestrators of the simulation. You know what I mean? And so it's something that's kind of been thought about for millennia, and yet it's still like this idea. But now we've kind of applied it with a modern twist of computers.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's
actually really interesting.
Yeah.
That's actually, yeah. So, I actually want to go off of what you're saying, because I think it's really applicable to this, to us right now in this day and age. There's actually a book called The Simulacra and the Simulacra and Simulation, right? You and I kind of like off the podcast, we've like talked about this. Like simulacrum is kind of our simulated avatar in like a avatar world, right? Like you create a character, let's say in World of Warcraft. That character is a simulacrum of yourself, right? It's you, but in a virtualized world. It's your avatar. It's who you interact within that world with or as. And so within this book, the author basically tries to examine like relationships between, you know, this reality, symbols, society, and like different like cultural and media constructs. And in this book, I believe, I haven't read it, but I believe in this book they actually talk about how like our world right now, or this is how I think that book could be interpreted. Our world right now, we can already say we are living in some sort of simulation, because ultimately a simulation it doesn't always have to be like, oh, you're in a computer, there's an overseer, you know, telling you what to do, or like in free will, putting something in your head to make you do something out of your own will. That media, like social medias and like, you know, news, they kind of control
Right.
our behavior in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Or they throw in these like stimuli that influence our behavior, and ultimately that is a sort of a simulation.
Right. So not even as like conceptual as kind of the
like
idea.
This could be base reality,
Right.
but yeah. So, but you know, because of these you know, companies and corporations, these cultural symbols, could be a form of simulation.
Right. But I mean, like, why do they exist though? You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like a simulation within a simulation.
It could be. Yeah. It could definitely be a simulation within a simulation. I mean, we have Sims, right? And then if we're in a simulation and we create the Sims, and then that means the Sims are in a simulation within our simulation.
Yeah.
But it's like because like ultimately the whole belief is that like us being in base reality is like improbable.
Right.
Like it's more probable for us to be in a simulation than us not to be in a simulation.
Yeah. I mean, so
that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Behind it. And so like the whole like, okay, where the hell did this whole simulation thing come from? It kind of got mainstreamed, or kind of got more talked about through this Swedish philosopher. His name is Nick Bostrom.
Hey.
Yeah.
Smart
Nick.
Guy. Smart guys are always named Nick.
Yeah, dude, that's facts. And the whole thing is, he writes a paper kind of arguing for the simulation, and he kind of has like three premises or three propositions, and he says one of these should be true or is true. So the first proposition is that the human species is very likely to go extinct before a post-human stage, before our ability to create simulations and go beyond, I guess, our biological shell.
Whoa.
And like this, yeah, and this is kind of connected to the whole thing called the Great Filter. There's this thing called the Great Filter, and if you look at something called the Kardashev scale, this scale categorizes civilizations. You know, there's type 0, type 1, type 2, and I think it goes up to type 3, and then it goes like into type 4 and 5, but those are like super like kind of fantasy. And I believe we're approaching type 1, and apparently the hardest transition to make is type 0 to type 1. Did you want me to go through the types, or you don't really care about that? I could if you want.
We can. I think I get it.
Okay. So yeah. So, and between type 0 and type 1 is the Great Filter. So that's what that's what you can compare this first proposition to. Like, we'll never be able to reach that because we'll go extinct. Whoa. As most civilizations have because of the Great Filter. And so that's proposition 1. Proposition 2 is any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of their evolutionary history, right? So it's unlikely that even if there is a post-human civilization, chances are they won't run a simulation for whatever reason. Huh. And the third proposition is, of course, we are most certainly in a computer simulation, but it doesn't have anything to do with like a advanced civilization trying to like figure out its ancestry or things like that. So that's the argument, or the three propositions that Nick Bostrom talks about in his paper about the simulation. Which one do you think out of those three? Which one do you think is most likely?
I liked the 0 to 1 and the Great Filter.
So proposition 1 will go extinct before reaching a post-human stage.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, low key with how things are going right now, I can see that happening.
Yeah.
As sad as that is to say.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much division, right? Like, I can't. I don't know. Maybe we're in the Great Filter right now. You know what I mean? Like, think about it. Like, if we can transition out, because like there is so much unrest in the world right now, right?
Right.
Like from the virus to like political stuff, and
yeah,
civil stuff, global crises, famine,
wars,
climate change, tension between countries, war.
Yeah.
If we can, and it seems like this year, dude, like this year, it really feels like it's all happening at once.
Yeah, it really does.
It just feels different, right? Like any other given year, right? We'll go online, right? We'll go on Twitter, we'll go on whatever. And we'll be like, oh, dude, did you hear, so-and-so is threatening war with so-and-so? And you're like, oh, okay. Like it's bad, but like that was the event of like the year.
Yeah.
Every month, it's been something new.
I know.
And low key, dude, I'm like jaded. I'm like numb to it at this point. Like if aliens came, I'd be like, damn, that's it. Like I'd just be like, damn. I wouldn't be like, oh, end of the world, Jesus' second coming.
Yeah.
I'd literally be like, oh wow, damn,
another one.
There it is. This must be August, or this must be September's big surprise. So we could very well be experiencing the Great Filter right now, and whether or not we make it out of this could be proposition 1.
Crazy.
That's crazy. And that's the whole premises behind the whole idea of simulation, right? Like the simulation theory and things like that. But then it's like, so what, right? Like people, I'm sure, if you've mentioned it to people, or you've, kind of heard people talking about it, they're like, okay, so what? We live in a simulation. That's not going to change, our everyday to day. Like you're still going to wake up. You're still going to go to work. You're going to do this and that, right? Like your everyday stuff, you're still going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, sure. Like, I guess, yeah. Like ultimately I've been doing this stuff for my whole, since my existence. Chances are I'm going to continue doing it because that's just how, I'm programmed. But at the same time, I think that's kind of like disingenuous. It's like, let's assume, right? Yeah, we're in a simulation. Man, that's going to change a lot. Think of it like from a religious perspective. Like, dude, that's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
Am I wrong to assume that?
No, I mean, well, I don't know, because I feel like there's not a huge difference between the belief in religion and the idea of a simulation, right? You just kind of apply the deity to the operator.
Simulator.
Yeah, or a simulator, and then our just reality is the simulation. I mean, I don't see like how it couldn't be applied, to be honest.
That's true.
Especially like I know a lot of beliefs kind of have the idea that there's, the deity figure has a plan for you, or you are living this life because of some reason. And so would that not be kind of, you could then apply it and say, even if it is proven that we are in a simulation, just say, well, yeah, because we're supposed to be, and because that was the plan all along, and because we need to do this, and this, we need to do good amongst ourselves and live good moral lives and blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I mean, ultimately, right, like you can draw a lot of parallels between, if we look at it from like a Christianity perspective, you can draw a lot of parallels between like a simulation and Christianity. Like we could say Adam and Eve were outside of a simulation.
Yeah.
Right? Because they were like in like
the garden.
The garden, like this unknown area, right? We can't really, I mean, people, like archaeologists and like scientists and stuff, like, oh, this could be where it was or whatever, but we don't know for sure. And that could have been like the area outside of the simulation.
Yeah.
And they could have, I don't know, I mean, I don't know how I can draw the parallel between, you know, a snake and like the apple, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. You could kind of, it's like religion is like applied simulation theory, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
So I don't think, I mean, but I think what it would have an effect on is, I mean, just the way that people kind of understand everything. And I don't know how much that would change everybody's day-to-day life or their core beliefs, but I think it would definitely, I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of the same thing as like what's going on now with like the virus, right? Like it's this huge event and it's this huge like kind of shift, I would say. But at the end of the day, like I feel like I still like go to the grocery store. Everyone's wearing a mask, right? But I'm still going to get my groceries. I still do this and that the same. There's things that have changed, right? But like overall, I would say like I haven't, at least personally, experienced like this huge change in the way the world is. You know what I mean? Yes, it's a little scarier to go outside. Yes, I wash my hands more. Yes, I wear a mask. Yes, I try to stay away from people. But at the end of the day, it's like not this huge, like gigantic shift. And I don't know if it were proven that we are in a simulation, you know what I'm saying? That it would make this big difference just because we probably wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Now, if we figured out that we were in a simulation and figured out how to do something about it, whether that be end it or become like the controllers of it, then that might be a huge, huge deal.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think ultimately, yeah, like if we compare it to the virus, I think you're absolutely right. Sure, there will be, you know, some changes, but for the day to day, I feel it would be the same. But I mean, we'd have to sit here and think about it like at a deeper level. But we're kind of, you know, we're like past an hour. This is our first episode. We've passed an hour, by the way.
Right.
What a way to close phase 1, huh?
Oh yeah, I was expecting this.
Yeah, no, I honestly, yeah, it was good. But just a quick closing thought on my end about the whole simulation and things like that. I think to kind of bring it back to reality and the virus, actually, this virus has now made wearing masks and socially distancing and things like that, it has made our new reality. This is our new experience. This is our new reality. And how life is perceived is different, but at the same time, fundamentally, it's the same. And I think ultimately, if we were to find out we live in a simulation, I think fundamentally things would not change simply because this is how we knew life. And just understanding that we live in a simulation won't fundamentally alter how society progresses or functions. I mean, sure, right? There's going to be, you know, outliers, just as there are outliers in any type of scenario that they won't believe it, right? No, it's a lie. It's fake news. We don't live in a simulation. And then there's going to be people on the other side of the spectrum that become like, you know, like doomsayers, like, oh, the end is near, you know, repent, things like that. But, you know, I feel like that'll be like a smaller group of people. But, you know, the average within that reality fundamentally will stay the same.
Right.
And I think ultimately, sure, I guess it doesn't matter, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't discuss this type of scenario or this type of reality, right? Like, so what if a lot of things happen? But that does a disservice to, you know, you and I sitting here and talking about it, exploring new ideas, exploring new possible realities. So, I mean, that's my closing thought on all of this, on the simulation and reality and things like that. So, yeah, man.
I totally agree with everything you just said. And I hope that the listeners found the last experiment of this phase enjoyable. It's been a pleasure thus far, and I'm really excited to see what boundaries we can push with the next phase of This Is an Experiment. Again, thank you all for listening and just kind of experiencing this reality with us.